The Brown family's journey, we're left to ask ourselves, what does family truly mean? Is loyalty a sacred bond, or does it become a prison of emotional manipulation and neglect? How can we reconcile the ideals of love and togetherness with the reality of self-respect and autonomy? These are the questions we're left to reflect on as we witness the ongoing unraveling of a family trying to hold on to a structure that, for many of them, no longer serves their emotional or personal well-being. If you've enjoyed this commentary on the Brown family, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful takes on sister wives and the complex dynamics at play. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Brown family will ever find a way to truly heal from these deep wounds? Let's continue the conversation. His own defensive posture. The emotional rift deepened, and Cody's inability to confront his feelings led him to further isolate himself, an unwilling architect of the family's emotional disintegration. Instead of healing, Cody's repression kept him in a prison of his own making, one that only pushed him further from the ones who needed him most. The death of Garrison was the final blow that cracked the fragile foundation of Cody's marriages. What had once been a tightly knit, albeit complex family was now splintering under the weight of unresolved grief, neglect, and emotional betrayal. For Cody, the loss of his father should have unified the family in shared mourning, but instead it revealed cracks that had long been hidden beneath the surface. Christine, who had always worn her heart on her sleeve, was the first to voice the deepening frustration she felt. She had always been the emotional backbone of the family, the one who organized, supported, and nurtured. But after Garrison's death, Cody's emotional detachment hit her like a slap. Instead of seeking comfort from her, he withdrew further into himself. Christine's growing frustration became impossible to ignore. She confronted Cody, demanding answers, but he only responded with more silence, more coldness. She felt invisible in her own marriage, discarded in the midst of a family tragedy that should have brought them closer together. Her pain, her loss, was disregarded in favor of Cody's internal chaos and his increasing reliance on Robin for solace. Christine, who had spent years sacrificing for her family, finally began to see the futility of trying to repair a relationship with someone who refused to engage with her. Janelle, too, felt the emotional toll of Cody's neglect. She had always been the one to hold the family together, but now, in the wake of Garrison's death, she found herself unable to carry the weight alone. Cody's withdrawal mirrored her own, but while she tried to keep the family intact, he turned further toward Robin, who seemed to offer him a refuge from the pain of the loss. The distance between them became unbearable. Janelle, who had once believed in the strength of her marriage, began to recognize the depth of the emotional isolation that had crept in, leaving her feeling unimportant, irrelevant in her own life. Mary, caught between the emotional neglect and her own sense of betrayal, became resigned. She had always been the quiet one, but the absence of intimacy, of connection, hit her hard. Seeing Cody's increasing favoritism toward Robin was a cruel reminder that her role in the family was no longer secure. Slowly, she started to withdraw, realizing that her place in Cody's life had eroded, along with her sense of purpose in the family. As Cody's relationships with his wives unraveled, he seemed oblivious to the deepening resentment. His focus on Robin, who, despite being a newer member of the family, received the emotional attention and care he could not give to his other wives, created a painful divide. The more Cody prioritized Robin, the more his other wives realized they had been living in a state of emotional neglect, their needs and pain sidelined in favor of his fixation. Betrayal grew in their hearts, and as their marriages crumbled, so did the family structure that had once held them all together. Each wife began to forge a path toward independence, realizing that their emotional survival no longer depended on Cody. The foundation of their marriages had eroded, leaving nothing but the harsh reality of their isolation. Christine's emotional awakening was a slow burn, a series of small realizations that finally erupted into a powerful moment of clarity. For years, she had silently tolerated the neglect and emotional abandonment in her marriage to Cody, all the while believing that her sacrifices, her unwavering support, would eventually be recognized. But in the wake of Garrison's death, and Cody's increasing distance, Christine began to see the reality of her situation. She had spent so long trying to hold the family together, trying to make it work for the sake of the children and the bond they once shared. But the more she tried, the more she was met with silence and coldness. It wasn't until the tell-all special that Christine found her voice, the courage to speak her truth in front of millions. The camera lights burned bright, but the truth that emerged was even brighter. As Cody attempted to deflect, to downplay the crumbling of their marriage, Christine finally confronted him with the raw anger and frustration that had been building inside her for years. "I am not your emotional punching bag anymore," she told him, her voice unwavering. "I've spent years being second to Robin, to your neglect, to your refusal to see me. I can't do this anymore." For the first time, Christine realized that she had a right to be heard, to be valued, not just as a wife, but as a person. It was a painful revelation, but one that freed her. The years of emotional repression were no longer holding her back. Her anger, once buried, was now her source of strength. In that moment, she made the decision to leave, to take control of her life. Walking away from Cody was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it was the most empowering. She was no longer defined by her role as his wife. She was reclaiming her own identity. The painful release of her marriage was the first step toward her emotional freedom. The unraveling of the Brown family was not just a crisis for Cody and his wives. It sent shockwaves through every member of the family, touching the children and even the extended circle of loved ones. Each person felt the emotional weight of the family's fracture differently, but the common thread was isolation. The once tightly knit unit had been split into fragments, and the deep loneliness that followed was pervasive. For the children, the disintegration of their family meant facing a confusing, painful reality. The loss of emotional stability, once provided by the family dynamic, left many of them questioning their identities. Cody's emotional neglect and Christine's departure created a sense of abandonment that was difficult to process. The older children, especially, began to reflect on their role in a family that no longer felt like home. Their relationship with their father had always been complicated, but with his emotional withdrawal and increasing focus on Robin, many of them felt like they had been forgotten. For the wives who remained, the isolation was equally profound. Each woman, struggling with her own grief and the dissolution of her marriage, found herself navigating an unfamiliar emotional landscape. Janelle and Mary, who had both tried to hold on to hope and maintain the unity of the family, were left to process their own feelings of betrayal and disillusionment. They had once believed in a shared purpose, but now their paths seemed to diverge, and the loneliness of that journey was hard to bear. The emotional toll also extended to the extended family, who were forced to watch the unraveling from the sidelines, unsure of how to intervene or offer support. The once vibrant gatherings that had been full of laughter and connection now felt strained, the joy replaced with the awkward tension of a family divided. But amid the pain, the journey of self-discovery began. It wasn't easy. Each family member had to confront their own emotional vulnerabilities, to grapple with their own sense of identity and belonging. Healing was slow, a quiet process that took place in moments of personal reflection, and often in isolation. The emotional vulnerability that had been avoided for so long was now unavoidable, but with it came a glimmer of hope. The fractured family, though broken, could begin to rebuild, each individual starting with the hardest part, themselves. In the final stages of the family's collapse, Cody's behavior remained rooted in denial and victimhood. Even as his marriages dissolved and his family fell apart, he continued to shield himself from full accountability, clinging to a narrative that framed him as the victim. During the tell-all interviews where tensions ran high, Cody's defensiveness became painfully obvious. When confronted by his wives about his emotional neglect, his prioritization of Robin, and the deep hurt he had caused, Cody's instinct was to shift the blame elsewhere. "I've tried everything I could to make things work," he insisted, his voice edged with frustration. "But no one ever understood the pressure I was under. I was just doing what I thought was best for the family." His words were a familiar refrain, a way of avoiding the truth that had been laid bare by his actions. He had been emotionally unavailable, neglectful, and controlling. He blamed the family dynamics, the stresses of polygamy, even Garrison's death, but never himself. Cody's refusal to confront the hurt he had inflicted on his wives, especially Christine, who had left him, was a tragic reflection of his inability to empathize with anyone else's pain. He painted himself as a martyr, a man who had been unfairly burdened by the weight of expectations and the chaos of his relationships. But as he continued to deflect responsibility, it became clear that he was not just denying the reality of his own failings. He was refusing to see how his actions had shattered the lives of those closest to him. His continual defense of himself, his insistence that he was misunderstood, only deepened the emotional rift. While his wives had begun to take control of their own destinies, Cody remained locked in his narrative of victimization, unable or unwilling to confront the truth of the destruction he had caused. The final confrontation was not a moment of reckoning for him, but another exercise in deflection, and in that, he sealed the emotional distance that had grown between him and the family he had once tried to control.
As the dust settled from the chaos of their fractured family, each member began to carve out their own path, slowly but steadily moving forward. Janelle, once the emotional glue holding everyone together, began to rediscover her own strength. Free from the weight of Cody's emotional neglect, she found new independence, focusing on her own personal growth and rebuilding relationships outside of the family dynamic that had once defined her. Christine, now fully emancipated from her marriage, embraced her newfound freedom with a sense of empowerment. She began to nurture herself in ways she never had before, seeking joy and fulfillment that had been absent for years. Her departure from Cody was not just an escape, it was the beginning of her reclamation of self-worth, and she flourished outside of his shadow. Mary, though quieter in her journey, found peace in solitude and reflection. The emotional toll had been great, but in her own way, she too began to understand the value of her independence. The realization that she was no longer bound by Cody's narrative gave her the courage to reframe her life on her own terms. The family, once united by a shared vision of polygamy and love, had now diverged into individual journeys. The separation was bittersweet, but each member, though scarred, was now free to heal and transform in their own way, stepping into lives no longer defined by Cody. The emotional journey of the Brown family has been one of heartbreak, self-discovery, and ultimately transformation. From the loss of Garrison to the unraveling of Cody's marriages, each family member has faced immense challenges, grief, betrayal, and the painful process of finding their own identity outside of the family unit. Yet, through it all, there's been a powerful thread of resilience. Janelle, Christine, and Mary are learning to rebuild their lives, step by step, shedding the weight of the past to embrace new beginnings. While the family's once shared vision of unity has now diverged, there's a quiet hope that each individual can emerge stronger, more self-aware, and free from the emotional shackles that held them back for so long. It's a bittersweet reality, but one filled with possibility. What do you think? Can a family truly rebuild after such deep emotional wounds? Or do some things like the Brown family's dynamic change forever? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below, and if you found this analysis meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Let's continue this conversation.